The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.
Good afternoon, Kristina. How are you?
I'm well, Fred. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm very excited today that we're going to introduce a gateway book, which I think will help professionals develop themselves. As we know, we've discussed that in order to have an impact in your culture, it's important to sort of be whole within oneself and have some coherence. And for this episode, we're talking about The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. But before we get into that, let me at least introduce you. So I'd like everyone to meet Kristina Wiltsee. She's a life alchemist and someone who's worked very, very closely with me over the past few years to make sure that not only am I in balance within myself, but I'm also in a position where I accept the things that happen in my life with equanimity and not with disdain and despair. So welcome, Kristina.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. And I would like to introduce Fred LeFranc, who is a chaos strategist, who is the co-founder of Results Through Strategy, and who is a brilliant leader in the restaurant industry and beyond. His wisdom has helped so many CEOs and coaches, and he's been a mentor to so many people in business and also in life as well. So we are both have aspects of the executive and the mystic within both of us.
Fantastic. All right, so let's get into it. So the Four Agreements is a very simple outline, which will help one begin to basically become a master of themselves. And I'm going to sort of introduce each one and have you sort of expand upon a little bit, Kristina, and then I will add some commentary if I think it's necessary.
So one of the things that's great about the Four Agreements that I find when I'm working with people is that sometimes if we've been given an example of principles that are just really very kind of small, they kind of keep us in our smallest self. And a way of describing that is they keep us in a toxic mindset. They make it so that we feel dysfunctional within our team, that we continually keep seeing issues. We start to recognize that we have principles that are actually limiting beliefs. Things like, I'm always meant to be alone, or I can never trust anybody, or everyone's going to betray me. Things along those lines are limiting beliefs that have been masquerading as principles. And one of the things that we talk about in the ABCs with alignment, balance, and coherence is that we need to align with universal principles. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do the Four Agreements as the first book, because it is such an amazing example of universal principles that you can align with that aren't toxic, right? That are truly aspirational. And for someone who's coming from a long way in their personal journey, showing up with these principles is a really great way of being able to say, okay, I know that I have a solid foundation for which I'm acting because I can say that I'm doing these basic things. Even if I was never given any example of that in any of my life or professional life or anything like that, I can rely on these.
No, that's very well put. And so I think as we go into it, we'll see how these principles do create a better alignment with what's going on in the world and eliminate a lot of stress in one's life. And so the first one is be impeccable with your word, which is really another way of saying have integrity.
Yes. Yes. There's two aspects of this that I think are really important. The first one is that, one principle is the external world, right? Like that's kind of the most basic thing. A commandment is thou shalt not lie. You could extrapolate be impeccable with your word to thou shalt not lie, but there's a lot more nuance in this because there's an external version of this, which I see as don't gossip, recognize that anything that you say is kind of always known and always heard by everybody. Or, it's like you think that something's being said in the quiet of your own conversation, but the recognition is that that's never actually going to just be in that conversation. It is a kind of guarantee that it may always be heard or known or understood. People communicate in many, many nonverbal ways. And if you are sitting here bad-mouthing somebody else, there isn't a lot of hiding that when we come to kind of the energetic level of the reality. And, it's one of those things I joke about the story when I was an actress back in the day and I had a hot mic. I kind of treat that hot mic experience as my whole life at this point. I'm always just going to be like, I'm just like, everything is a hot mic. Like I'm never going to say something to somebody else that I wouldn't say to that person, about somebody else that I wouldn't say to their face.
Sure. That makes sense. Well, being impeccable with your word, the word impeccable means without sin. And it's recognizing that words have not just meaning, they have impact. And it's the inner talk as well as the outer talk. So if you never want to say something to diminish or hurt somebody, that's being impeccable externally. Also meeting commitments. Right? I talked about integrity at the very beginning. If you say I'm going to do something, I'm giving you my word, then that word has to be contained. Now we live in a world, sadly, right now, if you don't have an agreement written by 10 lawyers, then you can't count on someone fulfilling something. Back in the day, you could have a handshake and that was impeccable. That's what it used to be like, but times have changed. The inner talk is the other one I think is pretty interesting to take a look at, because so many of us don't even think about that. If we lack self-awareness to hear the inner voice saying things to us over and over again that are diminishing us in some way, shape, or form, then don't be surprised if bad stuff ends up happening in your life. So that's an incredible piece of it, is to make sure you recognize the positive and negative aspects of giving your word, making sure you have integrity to what you say, so that in fact you can live a whole life that's in balance with your integrity.
Exactly. And the thing that again, you can recognize that I've worked a lot with people on the inner voice, particularly if that inner voice is making it so that you feel like you're an imposter, or you feel like you can never create something that is correct, or that you want to lash out in a rage, right? And almost always those external words, that kind of word vomit, so to speak, that happens when you feel like you can't actually control that. It always starts because the inner voice is way too loud and it's filling your mind up with trash, self-criticism, whatever you want to say. The system can't handle it. So it inevitably finds its way out. Like, you cannot contain your inner voice. It is going to show up in your life. And the more that you can be impeccable with your word, even just by gaining awareness of it, the better off you're going to be in terms of being able to be impeccable with your word externally. Like, you can't fake if, you go to a person and then you're like, oh, I really don't like this person because this person reminds me of my mother and my mother hated me. And then, and then you accidentally say something really awful and that person can't forgive you. And you're like, how did I get to this state? And you're like, no, there was a cascade of events that happened and it started internally.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And it's interesting because it's one thing for us to be impeccable with our word. The other thing is the person you're interacting with, that they impeccable with theirs. So they understand that words they say to us have an impact, or are they ignorant to that fact? Because it falls right into the second agreement, which is don't take anything personally. And if someone is saying something to you that sort of stings and hurts, it's helpful to understand what Eleanor Roosevelt once said, is that people can only insult you if you give permission to. I mean, we have to accept that as true. And if for whatever reason we don't have the self-confidence to know that what someone's saying to us that is either meant to be hurtful or is casually hurtful, unless we agree with it, it isn't necessarily that's the case, in fact, right? So
Yes.
What's your recommendation for don't taking things personally?
It's a tough one, because what we recognize is that the entire world is set up for everything to be taken personally, right? In the sense that everything has to go through our perception lenses, right? Every single thing in the world comes through our perception lenses. And the more that we're able to recognize that we're responsible for our perception lenses, like we're responsible for how that is hitting our system, the more that we can recognize that somebody who says something that is hurtful is in there just as much in their own mind as you are. I used to joke about when I first learned the word solipsism, right? Solipsism, I learned about it when I was reading Brave New World, which was, a world in which solipsism, which is the idea that you can only be accountable for your own space, that it's a completely kind of self-centered world. In Brave New World, solipsism is considered a crime, basically. Like, you're not supposed to have a single partner. Everything is a collective experience, right? With the idea that Aldous Huxley, who wrote it, was ultimately afraid that the world would deteriorate because no one would care about justice eventually. No one would care about anything if it were to happen, because they would just be enjoying themselves. So with that understanding, solipsism is a very Buddhist or Eastern way of thinking, because in Buddhism, when you're meditating, the only thing you understand is your own body and the sensations within your own body and your own mind and everything that's coming up in your own mind. You can't be held accountable to anybody else. But it also lends itself to the fact that you have a whole world inside of you. I have a whole world. You have a whole world. We all have a whole world. And if we are going to presume that another person is trying to, send or launch a cannon strike or like a
Yeah.
missile strike over at us when they have their whole system going on. That might be the case, but it doesn't benefit you to choose to take the hit, right? To choose to receive that as a personal slight, because all that's ever going to do is create imbalance in your life and make it so that you feel as if you're the victim. And wanting to stay out of the victim place as much as possible is really, truly the game, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. And obviously, when someone's directing something at you, it's out of their own insecurities, their own self story, just like we do it as well. So that's a good one.
This episode is brought to you by Results Through Strategy. Since 2006, RTS has been the go-to partner for restaurants and food service brands, navigating growth, transformation, or recovery. Their team of seasoned industry veterans helps companies rediscover their purpose, realign with their values, and implement strategies that build measurable, sustainable performance.
So let's move into the next one, which is don't make assumptions. And that one's good because one of the things that happens in communication is there's an intent, there's the behavior, and there's a reaction to it. And the sender knows what the intent is and does the behavior, says whatever they're going to say. The receiver does not know the intent unless they ask. And they just see something happen. And through our own filter, then we assume the intent might have been negative versus positive, because I like to tell people, assume positive intent. And it changes the perspective from assuming negative intent. And so many people are wired to think negatively. They're trying to get me in that regard. And so the concept of assumptions, which the classic one is makes an ass out of you and an ass out of me, is that you believe you know someone's intent and when you don't. And so what would you say to someone to say, if the principle here is don't make assumptions, then what does one do with the information that's being received?
So I think there's one thing to recognize is that, again, with those perspective lenses of like your past decisions, the principles, the limiting beliefs are all these lenses that all the information that comes to you has to go through. And recognize that if somebody sent that missile of words over to you and you've not allowed it to hit you, but instead you've decided to deflect it by making all of these assumptions about thinking that you understand and you know what that is, then it's just a slightly different strategy for the exact same thing. You're still letting it hit your perception lenses and letting that change whatever it is for you. And so one of the things that I like to talk to people about a lot is this idea that, if the universe is neutral, right, which is a basic principle that we talked about in our first things, if the universe is neutral and nothing is either good nor bad, that thinking doesn't make it so. Paraphrase for Hamlet, but recognize that do not make assumptions the assumption is basically wrapping up somebody's intent that you cannot know with all of your own personal stuff, right? And going on what I like to sometimes say, like the ultimate kind of like labyrinth of mind and mental situations, to be like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to ruminate on all the different things that person meant and what everything happens. And I don't have all the information, but I'm going to fill in the blanks. I'm totally going to fill in the blanks about exactly what that person meant. Because, again, recognizing that assumptions are almost always trying to fulfill some sort of strategy that is likely a limiting strategy. It's a villainous, as I would call a villainous strategy, right? If you were to say, Fred, Kristina, your background looks, what can we think of an example? What would be a case study for this, Fred? I know you're good at this.
Well, I mean, I'd say that first off, if something is said or something occurs that somewhat stings you and upsets you,
Yeah.
it's totally appropriate to ask someone, what did you intend by that?
Yes.
And to do it without accusation, not you did this to me, you said this to me, therefore you meant something bad. Just say, you know what, when this happened, this incident, and describe the behavior, I really felt bad. And I don't like feeling that way. Can you help me understand what you intended by that? And so you have the right to have an inquisitive mind to say, what did you mean by that? Now, if someone says, well, you pissed me off and I meant to hurt you, oh, well, then congratulations, you did a good job. But if in fact it was, no, I didn't intend that at all, it just came out of my mouth or whatever the case may be. And that's part of what you're trying to do is get clarity about the situation. as much as the other thing too, in terms of assumptions, if you know that as humans we do this automatically,
Yeah.
and you're going to have what's considered a crucial conversation with someone, it's really important to telegraph intent up front. Christine, I want to talk to you about something that happened last week that didn't leave me feeling really good. Is that okay? Because I'd like to reach clarity with you. And so that there's no, like, what's the agenda? What's going on here?
Yeah.
It's more of, okay, we're going to get some clarification. So much of what happens in personal and business relationships is miscommunication because people don't know what intent is. And that's where the assumptions come in. So if you're making assumptions, go get clarity. It makes it a hell of a lot easier.
So we've talked about nice versus kind, right?
Right.
And I think that really relates a lot to this. So I use an acronym for kind now in an effort to kind of try to explain what that is, right? K is for kairos. Kairos is a Greek term. It's like the opposite of chronos. They're both time related. Kairos is like, is it the right timing? Am I actually able to be kind because is this the right timing? Intent. What is my intent in actually telling this piece of information to somebody? And am I conveying that intent to this person? Nuance is you recognize the person and you understand the nuance of how they are. I used to be a type of person who always had to have criticism sandwiched because it was really hard for me to accept criticism. So for me, the nuance of the relationship of someone being kind to me was being like, I'm going to sandwich this. I'm going to say, I really love what you're doing here. This needs work. And I really love what you're doing here, right? The understanding of nuance. And then demeanor is the last one, right? Demeanor is, are you sitting here all high and mighty and kind of basically putting it in a position, right? And so recognizing that difficult conversations can be had not by actually leaning in and not trying to be nice or deflect or not tell somebody feedback, but you're being kind and you're kind of right timing. I'm conveying intent. I understand the nuance of the person and I understand how they can receive it and what is my demeanor as I'm doing it.
No, that's a great acronym to cover that piece of it. And so thank you for sharing that. And it does lead us to the last one, which does remind me of when I was a Boy Scout, and it's do your best. Which is always, but you're told as a child growing up, but do your best. And what does that really mean, do your best? I mean, is the assumption that we don't, or you have to be reminded of it, or is it a standard of excellence that you want to try and achieve?
It's a great question because I think that because don't take things personally, don't make assumptions, they're all very, very around the kind of perception of what is the best. I think that we can easily fall into the perfectionism trap. Which is, to me, it's a strategy that is not self-serving for the most part, because what it does is it kind of gives you an ability to alienate yourself from your own output or from your own like sense of satisfaction in doing something. And it also can alienate you from other people. Because you're holding this standard that's not really allowing you to connect with other people. And it's really like, it pulls you away from belonging ultimately. And so if we recognize that perfectionism in that form is what we're trying to stay away for, do your best becomes a deeply personal experience of I connected with who I am, what I'm capable of doing right now, and I'm doing my best within those circumstances. I'm not giving myself bad language. I'm not being unimpeccable with my word by being awful to myself in my mind and like, oh, you should have gotten up and done that thing at 2:00 in the morning because you knew you needed to do that. You didn't do your best. Like, no, that's a voice that is a conditioned voice inside of your head. Do your best says, I'm actually taking into account every aspect of myself in the circumstances, in the environment in which I am trying to do the work. And it's a deeply personal like a deeply personal reflection of do your best.
Yeah, I think it's doing your best is being fully present and engaged with the best of your abilities, as you said, in the point in time, given the circumstances you have. And it's about doing whatever you can do to achieve a result, but don't judge yourself by the result. I mean, there's a lot of sports metaphors all the time that you might lose the game in terms of the score, but you don't lose the game if you've done your best. Because you've done the best you possibly could, and you have the satisfaction that knowing you left it all on the field, that you didn't hold back on anything. And so that's really a nice thing. So, Kristina, let me ask you this then. If you look at the 4 agreements holistically, we talked about each one of them separately. Now put them all together as a direction for someone's life in terms of this. We said it's a gateway book. Okay, so what does that mean that it's a gateway? And what is this a gateway towards if we take all those 4 principles and put them into practice?
I think if we recognize that so much of the work of making your workplace a better place, making your life and your family a better place, is to get out of the toxicity of self-hatred, honestly, if you want to say it. Like anything that kind of limits you from being able to integrate and love all aspects of yourself. It sounds hokey, but it is absolutely crucial, because when you hurt people, right? That's an old adage, right? And if we look holistically at all these things, all of them are giving you principles in which you can hate yourself a little less, right? If you like,
that's good.
But I say that jokingly, but not really, because if you can find something, anything, it may not be these 4 agreements, it may be something else. If you can find, it's what I always talk about, is like sometimes you need to find a ledge. Sometimes when it feels like everything is falling out and you want to fall into despair or you want to fall into a bad space, find a ledge. Find something inside your mind that you can say, but I did that.
Yeah.
I was impeccable with my word, or I didn't take it personally, or something like this. These principles can form ledges in which we say, but I'm doing it better. I've decreased the intensity of my self-hatred and that my bad critical thoughts of myself. I'm not I don't hate myself or go on a tirade inside my head and take things personally. The duration has decreased and I'm not doing it as much, right? That's why I always say intensity, frequency, and duration are always the best kind of markers in which you can say, hey, you don't change overnight. But hey, I have a ledge. I have a principle that can say, I did do this. I did my best. And I'm going to be as kind to myself as I can be.
Well, and of course, not everyone has self-hatred. But if you have a sense of self-criticism, which is part of that spectrum, right? You find yourself in a spot of, I don't hate myself, but I don't think I'm doing the best that I can. And it is about being kind to oneself as well. And recognize that as humans, we're subjected to a lot, especially as leaders. I mean, there's so much uncertainty in life today. And if you're trying to lead a business, much less lead your own life with everything that's coming at us, we're a tweet away from disaster. And so you just never know what's going to happen. And it's about being present and being aware of these things and then using them to help balance out what you're trying to do. And really, I know for me, several gateway books that have impacted me have allowed me to at least have a different perspective. And that's, of course, that's your strength, Kristina, is to say, look at your life. But now let's look at it from this angle or this angle, and you'll see something very, very different than what you have imagined solely in your own mind. And that's what makes it very important.
Yes, agreed. And I think that whether you are a person who is aware of your self-criticism or in its extreme self-hatred, or whether you're somebody who just finds maybe that you can only see things in your external world showing up, right? Like, and I say that as in the case of like, you see the smoke, but you can't understand the fire yet. And it's not that everybody has a monologue in their head that they can say this is self-criticism, but what we recognize is that, we are mostly being governed by our subconscious processes, right?
Yes.
That's just the reality of it. And if you can wedge into your subconscious principles that kind of can get into that OS, so to speak, that can get into that kind of default mode network, that place that is in there. And from there, it becomes fertile ground for, yes, this makes sense. Yes, this happens. That eventually what happens is that the subconscious bubbles up into your conscious world, which then bubbles into your outside world. Because thought leads to action, leads to external action, then we can actually really see that there's a marked change in the way that we lead, in the way that we experience our life, in the way that we do this. It's one of those things that you can really emphasize how important it is to create the building blocks that can go into your subconscious that say, yes, I do believe that I can do better. And I do believe that I can take care of these kind of toxic things that I was taught, and I can model them for myself and other people.
No, that's well put. I think for all of us, keep in mind that we're still going to slip. You can after the behavior, after the action, go, oh, I did it again. But that's okay. You create an awareness of it. And sooner you sort of start at the end and work your way back to finally catch the impulse. Before you take that negative step, before you are self-critical, whatever the case may be, you go, oh, wait a minute, that's not real. It's imagined. Yeah. And let me follow suit with that. I think that's well put. And, for the audience, if there's any other books that you'd like to recommend as gateway books for us to discuss, we'll be happy to take your recommendations and see what we do. But thank you so much for joining us on this brief episode of Explaining the 4 Agreements.
Thanks, Dale.
The Executive and the Mystic podcast co-hosted by LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.